Hello everyone, in this short video we are going to talk about measurements. So this is a very important step in survey data analysis because it related to how you're going to design your survey to collect the data. So for measurement, what is it? Why is it so important? And how can we actually measure those variables? There are three different steps of measurement. First step is called conceptualization. You need to conceptualize it, right? The thing that you actually want to measure. You need to define the concept so that it will help you to the next step, which is called operationalization. You need to operationalize it, right? Really come up with some method that can actually capture the things that you want to measure. And then when you have the measurement, you need to evaluate, right, to see whether or not it's actually valid and reliable. Then we are going to talk about 4 different levels of measurement. Interval ratio, that refers to continuous quantitative measures. And you also have nominal and ordinal, refers to those categorical measures. All right, so what is measurement? Measurement is a process, right? It refers to systematically observing some features or characteristics of the world. Then you record it, right, in a number or in a category. And this measurement is particularly important because we are going to use them to measure our dependent and independent variables, or some other control variables we haven't referred here. But remember, measurement is to measure the variables, right? So measurement basically have attached values, right? So you are going to use these values to represent your variables. So why is this so important? Why should public administrators and nonprofit managers care about measurement? Now, this is because it's all related to performance measurement and program evaluation. Now, for public administrators or the bureaucrats, they want to understand if there's a policy, if the policy is being implemented. So how is the effect of the policy, right? Is this effective? Is this helping people or what? So you need a measurement to understand the performance, right? So if you are a leader of a public organization, you also need to understand whether or not this agency is functioning effectively, right? So what kind of measurement can you use to measure the performance? Because you need to understand the performance to be able to lead the organization to a next level. The same thing apply to a program level, right? So we talk about like policy level, we talk about organization level. So how about the program level? Now, for most of the nonprofit managers, they are actually supervising like couple or several programs. So they need to know whether or not, if their resources constrained, they need to know which program they should invest more resources, right? Or other programs, if they are not functioning quite well, they probably need to be shut down in the future, right? So program evaluation, performance measurement, all these are practical requirements or needs. So that's why we need measurement in policy and practice, right? So here's some examples to show you why measurement in public policy and practice is so important. For instance, you are going to measuring crime rates, right, to manage a police department. And you can measure educational achievements to manage a school system. And of course, you need to measure poverty rate to manage those development programs. All right, so then how to measure? How can we measure? The basic model looks like this, right? So for instance, you want to measure. Now first you need to construct the measure. Now obviously, each time you construct some measure, you are going to bring in some errors, because no measure is actually perfect, right? You left something out, so that's why you have some error there. So there are three different steps in the measurement process. First is define the concept to be measured. All right, if the concept is very complicated, for instance, poverty, right? Poverty is not only refer to economic conditions, but also health, educational dimensions, right? So if that's the case, then you probably also need to include different dimensions that you want to define. All right, so this is called conceptualization. Now, afterwards, you need to operationalize it, which means you are going to translate a construct into a measure. Right? The construct is the concept or one of the dimensions or all the dimensions. Then you need to really translate it into a measure, identify those observable indicators. Right? If they can be quantified, then you come up with numbers. If they can be categorized, then you come up with categories. Right? So you need to establish an observation procedure, right, that will allow you to operationalize them. And finally, after you come up with all those measurements, then you need to evaluate them to see whether or not they are valid and reliable. Now, valid, which means if multiple persons measure this, they are going to come up with similar results. Reliability means if you measure this multiple times, generally speaking, they come up with very similar results, right? And of course, sometimes you need to judge based on your knowledge to see if this is from the face to see if it's valid, right? So this is called validation and reliability. So step one, conceptualization, right? So where do conceptualization came from? It came from legislation, regulations, and policy debates. Now, for instance, war on poverty, right? So the war on poverty first only focused on living conditions. Then people realized the economic condition alone can't precisely describe poverty. Then you also bring in educational conditions as well as health conditions, make poverty a multi-dimensional concept, right? So that's one thing. Or it can come from management initiatives. So for instance, customer service, right? So satisfaction alone, is this enough to improve customer service? Maybe not, right? So then you really need to dig deeper. Maybe this include responsiveness, transparency, accountability, etc., right? Especially for public agencies. And also, of course, it came from the theory, right? So let's say broken window theory. If you don't fix small broken windows, it's a signal, right, to invite more crimes to the place because there's disorder and there's not sufficient resource being put in public safety, right? So disorder here is a variable. It can be measured by like a number of small crimes or number of vandalism, etc., right? So these are the conceptualization, the roots. All right, so the second step, operationalization, right? How can we operationalize it? You can have instruments, you have protocols. Of course, you need people to do the measurement, right? And of course, you need data sources. Right? So sometimes, if especially when you are conducting secondary data analysis, then sometimes the measurements really rely on the existing data instead of you design it, right? You primary it to collect them. So the final step will be evaluation and focusing on validity and reliability. Now, the difference between validity and reliability. So let's take a look at this, right? So if it's reliable, which means the error or the noise is much smaller, right? You capture the large part of it, so that means good reliability. Now, if it's a poor reliability, which means you only capture a small part of the thing that you're going to measure, but the noise is actually larger than that. So this, I think, is a good example to discuss the relationship between validity and the reliability, right? Now, we of course want to hit the target in multiple times, right? So validity basically means if you ask different people to do it, they are going to come up with the same or similar results, right? So this is means they are around the center, all right. But reliability means if you do it multiple times, they are very close to each other because they are possibly very similar results, right? So the first one, upper left, right? So this is not around the center, it's scattered, so that's unreliable and not valid. And upper right, you'll see it's round the center, however it's scattered, right? So round the center means valid, but this is not reliable. And left corner down here, you'll see this is close to each other, but it's far away from the center. So which means this is reliable, right? Because you do it multiple times, it's all shorts over there. However, they are not in the center. So that means they are not valid. So reliable, but not valid. The last one, right? Both reliable and valid because it's around the center, right? And it's close to each other. Right, so this is both reliable and valid. Now, what we are looking for measurements is we want them to be both reliable and valid. All right, to summarize, 3 steps in the measurement process. All right, conceptualization, operationalization, and the evaluation. All right, now let's talk about different levels of measurement. So first, we divide all the measurements into 2 different large categories. The first one will be continuous quantitative measures. All right, so basically numbers. All right, the second large category will be categorical measures, which means different categories, different groups. Right. So in the within the continuous quantitative measures, you have interval and the ratio. So for ratio, generally speaking, you have a meaningful zero. Right. So and for interval, you have meaningful distance between the numbers. I'm going to explain this later on. And for categorical measures, you have nominal and ordinal. The difference is whether or not you have an order, right? If the categories are ordered, then you say this is an ordinal measure. Otherwise, this is a nominal measure. All right, so the difference between interval and the ratio. Let me just simply point to this. All right, all the ratio measures are interval measures, but not vice versa. All right, so let me give you some examples that are only intervals but not ratios. For example, temperature in Fahrenheit, IQ scores, GPA, or the index like CPI or something like that, or the scaled scores. All right. So all these have some commonalities. First, the starting point is arbitrarily decided. All right. So for instance, GPA, right? So no matter how bad you performed in the exam, the starting point of GPA is actually not 0, right? So if this is a 1 to 4 scale, you at least get something, right? And if you have like 0 GPA, it's no, it's not possible in this case, right? Yeah. So, but even for instance, IQ scores, right? So you have a 0 IQ score. That's also not possible. But 0 in IQ score does not have a true meaning. Okay, so that's meaningless, right? Because there's no 0 in the IQ scores. Now, let's say if you have an IQ, now if somebody, all right, if somebody have a IQ like score like 80, while the other person have an IQ score of 160. Now, can you say the later person is twice as smart as the first person? No, you cannot say that, right? Because this ratio, if you divided these two numbers, the 2 doesn't have a true meaning. Because you can't say someone is twice smart than the other people. All right. Same applied to temperature, right? So here we probably in Michigan, it's very cold, right? While in Florida is very hot. But can you say like Florida is twice hot than Michigan? What do you mean by twice, right? So there's no such thing called twice hot or twice smart, right? So they don't have a true meaning if you divide these two interval numbers, all right? So that one doesn't have a true meaning, okay? So if you have all these three criteria been met, then we will say this is an only interval, but not a ratio measure. All right. So let's talk about the difference between nominal and the ordinal. First, they all refer to different categories, right? So for nominal, they are not ordered, and usually a larger number just represents a different category, right? So for instance, sex, you have male, female, I'd rather not say, right? You coded a male as 0, female as 1, I'd rather not say as 2. Now does 2 as a number, as a value is larger than 1 and larger than 0. But does 2, I'd rather not say actually larger than male or female. Right? It doesn't make any sense. So for instance, race, right? So you have, for instance, white is 0, African Americans as 1, Hispanic as 2, the others as 3, right? So the larger number, right? The largest number here is 3, but does not mean other races are actually larger or important than the others, right? It just means this is a different category. You use different numbers to represent different categories, right? While ordinal is a different story. It means ordered, right? Usually a larger number means a higher or larger, bigger, important, more important category. So for instance, we have income levels like, okay, low income, medium income, and high income, right? So we coded low income as 1, median income as 2, high income as 3. So 1, 2, 3, you have the order. And the 3 actually means a higher income than 2. And the 2 actually means higher income than 1, right? So also educational backgrounds. Let's say we coded less than high school, right? Don't hold a high school diploma as 0. And high school diploma as 1, and associate degree and the college as 2, and the graduate degree as 3. So 3 is larger than 0, 1, 2, right? And the 3 also means longer education years, right? Because you go to the graduate school, right? So which means you already have the high school diploma, and also have a, most likely, right? Also have a college degree, and then you have a graduate degree, right? So if you put different categories in order, right? The order actually have a true meaning, then we call this ordinal measures. All right. I hope I explained all the differences. between interval and a ratio, as well as nominal and the ordinal. Thank you very much. That will be all for this short video.